Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today with my impressions on Pokemon Sword and Shield, the latest entry in the Pokemon mainline RPG franchise. Naturally, as an RPG channel, we gotta talk about this. But before I get into my thoughts on the reveal, allow me just to ask for some respect on my opinion, because I know it's a little bit against the grain for what I've been seeing around the web. If you are hyped to the high heavens and you love what you saw in this reveal, I'm not saying you can't be excited, and I'm not saying what I saw was bad, so please do keep all of that in mind as we continue our discussion here, and let's have a civil discourse in the comments down below. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts, but ultimately, after seeing this full reveal, I felt as a lifelong Pokemon fan that I needed to see more to decide whether or not I'll be picking this game up, which is different from pretty much most Pokemon games from the past. Now let me start off with some positive stuff so you guys know I do like things that I saw about Sword and Shield. First off, the models look slick. It reminds me a bit of Sun and Moon without the shaders around the edges of the character models, which in turn gives it a little bit more of a realistic look. I think environments have gorgeous backdrops and more variety. Just from a first glance, we can see a starter town, it seems like, a misty forest, and then we have a bustling city with a train running in the background. The environments look more active, more engaging, more visually enticing, and more varied, which I personally like. We also see a snowy valley. There is a lot to like about the world we're going to be exploring in Pokemon Sword and Shield, and I think this is going to be a really exciting region for fans to be a part of. Furthermore, the starter Pokemon are adorable. Let's not kid ourselves. Even if you hate Pokemon, you can't help but look at Grookey, Scorbunny, and Sobble and go, oh my god, please be my pets for the rest of my life. Now, personally, I'm going to be picking Scorbunny, and I'm usually not a fire Pokemon kind of guy. I usually go with the grass or water. I know a lot of the internet has fallen in love with Sobble, and I can't blame you guys. He's an adorable one, but Scorbunny just seems like such a G. I gotta go with him. Anyway, that's kind of where a lot of the high praise stops for me, and the rest isn't complaints or things I hate, but more so things that stuck out to me and went, not quite sold just yet. So I'm not one of those Pokemon fans who was hoping and praying for a Breath of the Wild styled Pokemon game. I believe with the incremental upgrades across each iteration that is such a drastic jump and would be foolish to expect in the terms of a new Pokemon game just because it's coming to the Switch. I figured, especially based on what we saw in Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu, that there was no shot that we were going to all of a sudden see Pokemon enter this large 3D open world and there would be zero limitations to where we could go, and battles would be more action focused rather than the turn-taking battles we've come accustomed to for all these years. That was simply unrealistic to expect, and it was all fueled by a photo which looked dope, by the way, on Reddit, but I digress. I was not personally expecting that. So with that said, I am a bit concerned with some of the seemingly fixed camera perspectives during exploration returning alongside a sense of linearity. Once again, I'm not expecting this vast open world game, okay? But I do hope that as it shows more of itself, we do see areas are a bit more vast, open to explore, which in Sun and Moon we got a bit of a feeling for that, and I think that was punctuated by you could actually walk around trainer battles, which is fundamental to leveling up and scaling your team as you go along the adventure in Pokemon. So I think that yes, if you made Pokemon an entirely open world game, the entire design philosophy, progression of the world, and aim for the game and the series in general would have to completely change, and would also, I think, demand many more years of development to get that game out, and in turn Pokemon would not be an annual series like it normally tends to be. However, when I was looking at, for example, the Snow Valley and I saw a straight line, or when our character was running alongside the city and it was a fixed camera angle from the side, I expected a little more openness, and I think that's fair to say. But I did see some changes that I also liked. For example, it seems like the gyms in this game are actually Pokemon stadiums. Now, one of my favorite Pokemon game of all time is the original Pokemon Stadium. It's really what propelled my love for the franchise, because I remember playing Blue, which was my introduction, falling in love with Pokemon, but then you felt like things really came to life in Stadium because of the extra technology that was booked into the Nintendo 64, which sounds a little funny to say out loud now in a generation where we have high-powered PCs, PS4, Xbox One, but you get what I'm saying, that back then the 64 could do more than your Game Boy Color. And so it was amazing to see these little sprites turn into full 3D models and be completely animated. So naturally, seeing these gyms be pretty much Pokemon stadiums tickles a bit of my nostalgia, and I think it adds a sense of scale, of fanfare to these Pokemon battles where they're almost entertainment for folks. And I think that can bring about some interesting issues for the story of people who maybe don't like that style of Pokemon being treated that way. Now let's roll the clock back to the 3rd generation when we saw Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire in 2002. Emerald is my personal favorite Pokemon game of all time, which is on the Game Boy Advance. And then 3 years later, we saw Gale of Darkness on the GameCube. The multitude of differences between these versions was stunning, and expectedly so given how technology was back then versus now. Much similar to the Game Boy Color versus the Nintendo 64, the Game Boy Advance versus the GameCube, there was a lot more power packed into those home consoles, where there is a gap between the power of the 3DS and the Switch that is quite obvious, but I was expecting more of a standout leap, maybe not akin to what we saw in Emerald versus what we see in Gale of Darkness, but something strong enough to make me go, wow, that is a Switch-only thing right there. And I think some folks will jump to that and say, well, what about the environments, Matty? Because those seem vast and big, but they tend to be backdrops, I've noticed. Like, we see this gorgeous hill here, but we're walled off by a fence, and we can see a path in front of that hill, and maybe that's what the world will fuel the player with, is seeing that path right next to that hill and pretty much knowing that down the line you'll be running along that in another significant moment in the adventure. There is always that possibility. And I think those are things that are a bit different if you have your hands on the game. A lot of times nowadays I've noticed with games is that trailers don't sell, at least me, as often as they used to, and normally when I actually put my hands on the titles, when I really get a feel for what I like and don't like about the game, which makes the most sense, right? But I digress. You can usually take away a little bit more information from trailers, but things like that, such as the environmental interactivity and seeing something and later exploring it, is something that really only you can get a sense of when you have your hands on the game. However, another quality of life change, at least in my opinion, that I think is missing so far based on what we saw in this quick reveal, were the changes from Let's Go not really being inside this newest iteration Sword and Shield. What I mean by that is things like random encounters are now back, but in Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu, I was just playing Let's Go Eevee about a month and a half ago and I had finished it, and one thing I really did like, while the game was flawed in some ways and it seemed very, very kid-friendly, like the addition of motion controls, very low difficulty, and so on, was that you would see Pokemon in the open world that you could bump into, and something about just seeing them out there and choosing, I'm gonna go after this Pikachu, or I'm gonna go after this Pidgey. Something about that brought the world to life in a way, and yes, part of it was a bit of nostalgia backing it because I could be in this region that I had grown up in, and then seeing these Pokemon fly around, it brought the whole thing to life in a very unique way. But that's something that I would have loved to see be brought into the mainline RPG series, because I don't think it betrays any core values. If, for example, I saw one of the new Gen 8 Pokemon, I bumped into them, and then we went into the typical battle that we've seen for so many years, instead of like in Let's Go, where you would just use the motion controls, or you'd press the A button and try to catch it yourself. The other thing that I'm really missing here, and I think is something that will be added down the line or we will see more of, is Pokemon following you around. I thought that was such a cool connection that you could have with the squad that you have captured or grown yourself, and I want to see that actually return in Sword and Shield, because one of the more popular things that's happened over the years of Pokemon is the way you can interact with them, whether you're petting them, feeding them, taking care of them, and I think having them follow you around and building bonds with them, that's such a cool system that's also very RPG focused, but I think it's something that is natural for the player. Like, you want to care for your Pokemon, you build a bond with them, you don't want to take them out of your party because you get certain benefits when you grow closer to them. I think part of that's tied to letting them follow you around, making the world feel alive around you rather than just one little player running around all these beautiful backdrops down these very narrow pathways. So I really do like a lot of things I did see with it. Like I said, the environmental variety is fantastic. I think that the music also, I did not mention that, sounded really good in the trailer. I was a huge fan of that. And there are things I am looking forward to, but I do need to see more. And I'm not like what I've seen for about 95% of the internet. And also when I put it out on Twitter, some people were like, yeah, I can see what you mean, but most people are like, I respectfully disagree. And if you do disagree, that's totally fine with me. I know a lot of people were on the fence for a Switch, and the only thing they did need was to see a mainline Pokemon game be announced, be revealed, to say, okay, that's it, that's good enough for me, I'm gonna go ahead and get a Switch now. And to those people, more power to you, because I get what you're talking about. Pokemon's one of my favorite franchises of all time, and I totally understand the feeling of wanting to see that main Pokemon game on the Switch exclusively, so that's the thing that pushes you over the top and makes you want to buy the console. Totally get that. I'm hoping mechanically, interaction with the world-wise, and environmentally, we see some more drastic leaps on things that were only possible with the Switch. Right now, I'm getting the feeling with Pokemon Sword and Shield, just off this initial reveal, is that it's another Pokemon game, which is fine because Pokemon is a blast, and I loved Sun and Moon. They actually reinvigorated my enjoyment for the franchise because I was out of it for a little bit. For example, I wasn't a huge fan of the original Black and White, and that's when I started to really fall out of things, but then Sun and Moon reinvigorated me, so I'm ready to love and enjoy a ton of Pokemon again. So I want to see this franchise take some more risks, try some different things, and not play it safe like seemingly they kind of are. But that doesn't mean it's going to be a bad game, and it doesn't mean that I won't like what's there. It's just right now I want to see more before I make up my mind on whether or not I'm going to be hyped. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this reveal in the comments down below. What do you feel about Pokemon Sword and Shield? Like I said, please do respect my opinion. I respect yours whether you're hyped or not. It's all good. We're just here sharing opinions, and usually my audience is pretty good at that, but I don't know how much attention this video will get and how many Nintendo fans will agree or disagree. But I was reading some comments, and generally most people are excited, but some people are also, yeah, it looks solid, I guess. So we'll see the general consensus when I read later on. I'm looking forward to seeing what you all have to say. Other than that, be sure to follow me on Twitter, like me on Facebook. Those links are in the description down below, along with my Patreon. Do consider supporting that, as it fuels all the content I create here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.